Well, tonight for our question and answer session, you see the question that's on the board. Why is the New King James Version a bad version to use? And you know your pastor uses only the King James Version. We don't use the New King James Version. I've had a number of people, not necessarily from right here in our in-person services, but some of our online folks who have asked the question, several of them over the last few months, what is the difference between the King James Version and the New King James Version, and why do we not use the New King James Version? Because the reality is, if you go to one of the Christian bookstores and you're telling them that you want a King James Bible, it's pretty common that they're going to try to recommend to you a New King James Version rather than the King James Version. And they will tell you when you go there that there really are no differences. They are the exact same text. It's just updated modern language, which really is the same thing they tell you if they're trying to sell you the NIV or one of the other versions too. But if someone is intelligent enough with the knowledge, savvy enough with knowing the knowledge about the different texts between the different families of manuscripts, and somebody says, well, I use the King James Version because it comes from a different family of manuscripts than those other versions, that's when they usually will say, well, the New King James comes from the Textus Receptus family of manuscripts, just like the King James Bible does. So why not just go with the New King James, because it's the same text, doesn't leave all those verses out that those other modern versions do. It's just updated English words in place of the Elizabethan English of the King James Bible. So I thought it might be a benefit to not just the folks that asked the question, but maybe to everybody to try to explain why we don't use the New King James, even though it claims to be a King James version of the Bible. So I've listed 4 reasons on the whiteboard up here, and we'll just briefly go through each of the 4 reasons. The first reason says the New King James Version uses imprecise language. Now, they tout the New King James Version as being a better version because it's modern English language and it ought to be easier to understand. But just because the words are the kind of words we speak in the 21st century doesn't necessarily mean that the words are more accurate than the words in the King James Version. I want to use an illustration from a passage that I actually used in a sermon several months ago that shows the difference, where if you have the King James Bible, you can clearly understand what's being said. But if you read it in the New King James Version, even though there's only a very slight change in one word, it could mean all the difference in understanding what it's saying. So if you have your Bible and you want to look at it with me, you can turn to Matthew 26. If not, you can just listen as I read. I'm just going to read a few verses and then we're going to key in on one verse out of the passage. But in Matthew 26, Jesus is before the high priest after he's been arrested there in the Garden of Gethsemane. And it's the same thing they later did with Stephen. It's a mock trial. It's not a real trial. They've already decided what the outcome is going to be. But beginning in verse 61, the high priest said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days. And the high priest arose and said unto him, Answerest thou nothing? What is it which these witness against thee? But Jesus held his peace. And the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God." Of course, Christ meaning Messiah. He's asking Jesus point blank, are you the Messiah or not? Jesus saith unto him in verse 64, Thou hast said, Nevertheless, I say unto you, hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Now, reading that verse, in the King James, it says, Hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Reading this verse in the King James, you get something different than if you read it in the New King James. In the New King James Version, it says, "Hereafter shall you see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven." So again, this is the same thing that fellow trying to sell you a Bible at the bookstore would say. See, they took the ye out because we don't say ye today, and they put you in there because that's what we use. And I used this illustration in a message, like I said, several months ago. The differences between the ye and the you. You know, in the King James Bible, we have these and thous, and then we have the ye's. Anytime you see thee or thou, that's singular. That's one person. So anytime in your King James Bible, if you see thee or thou, just know it's one person that it's talking to or about. If you see ye, it's always plural, meaning more than one person. I know, like y'all, that's right. It's the southern version of y'all. I mean the other version of y'all, that's right. But in modern English, we use you for both singular and plural. So when you were learning your personal pronouns back in 4th grade or whenever you had to learn those originally, I, you, he, she, it, we, you, they. You is singular and you is used for the plural. So in modern English, unless you know the context, you don't know if the person is saying you as in just you, Randy, or you as in you and Marie, Randy, because you can be singular or plural. So in the New King James Version, when Jesus is talking to that high priest, and he says, you're going to see the Son of Man coming in power in the clouds, why, you don't know if Jesus is saying that high priest is going to see that, or if all of you Jews one day are going to see that. It could mean either one. And of course, there are some entire denominations or cults who have built entire belief systems around the idea that that high priest Jesus was talking to actually saw all of the end time events in the Bible fulfilled, that they were already fulfilled. All those things in the book of Daniel, all those things in the book of Revelation that we look at as future events, they say they were fulfilled in Jesus' generation because Jesus told that high priest he was going to see it happen. So whether we understand it or not, it already happened in the past. Well, you and I know that's not true. It's still future. So the difference is that that word that Jesus said is ye. And in the King James Bible, if we know that thee and thou is singular and ye is plural, now we know Jesus wasn't telling that man, that individual, that high priest, you personally are going to see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. He was saying to all the unbelieving Jews that the unbelieving Jews, you all are going to see the Son of Man coming in the clouds one day. That's what he was saying, you plural. And so the New King James Version uses imprecise language. You say, well, preacher, how many times does something like that occur where it makes a big difference like the one you showed? Well, maybe not many, but any at all can have a difference in how you interpret Scripture. Number two, the New King James Version had to change at least 10% from the King James Version. Well, why did they have to change at least 10% of the words? Well, because in order to get a copyright, you have to change at least 10% of the words from that previous edition so that you can now get a copyright of your version. The King James Bible is the authorized version, and it was authorized by the King of England in the English language. There is no copyright to it, so anyone can use it anytime, quote from it, either in written form or in spoken form. You don't have to give credit to anybody. You can quote it anytime you want to, free of charge. But these booksellers, publishers, that come out with these different newer versions, they want to have royalties so that if somebody quotes from their version, they're technically owed a royalty on that every time that happens, with certain exceptions for educational purposes. And so as a consequence, if they want to get a copyright on their newer version, it has to be at least 10% different than the original King James, which means there may be instances where the wording in the King James Version is the exactly best translation of a verse in the English language. But even if it was the best way to say it, they want to get their copyright, so they've still got to go in and change something to less than the best translation in order to get their 10% changes. Number 3 reason. The New King James Version does not follow the Textus Receptus. Now, that fellow in the bookstore who doesn't know any better and is just telling you what he was told to say or what he read in the advertising literature promoting the New King James Version, he's going to say, well, the New King James Version was translated from the same manuscript family as the King James Bible, the Textus Receptus line of manuscripts, and so you can trust it. It came from the same manuscripts as your King James Bible. Well, that sounds well and good, but the reality is it's not true. The New King James Version, in more than 1,000 places, chooses the text of the critical text, the Alexandrian text family of manuscripts, over the Textus Receptus family of manuscripts, which of course is the line of manuscripts that were preserved by Baptist peoples for the last 2,000 years. And so the New King James Version, while that little note in the front of it says it came from the same manuscripts as the King James Bible, well, yeah, that's what they say they started with, but there are over 1,000 instances where they went with the reading of the other line of manuscripts. So it's really hypocrisy to say that it's from the same family of manuscripts as our King James Bible, the Textus Receptus family, when in fact it's not in more than 1,000 places. It's just a lie to get people to think it's the same as the King James Version. And then number 4, the New King James Version is just a bridge to get you to the other versions. And the reality is, even if none of those other things were true, your pastor still wouldn't use it at Pinnacle Baptist Church, because all it's doing is trying to open the door just a little bit so the devil can stick his foot in there. It's a bridge to get people, well, once it's okay to use something other than the King James, even the New King James, why, it's just a little step from there to the NIV, the ESV, and this or that from there. So it is a bridge to the other versions, which are even worse than the New King James. So those are 4 reasons. There are maybe some others, but there are 4 good reasons that we don't use the New King James Version. Does anybody have any questions, comments?
Why did King James go to the...
Well,
after so many years.
The New King James Version was produced by a publishing house, not by anyone who had anything to do with the original King James Bible. This is just a printing house that prints books to sell. The only purpose in coming out with the New King James Version from their perspective was to make money off it. And
when did that happen?
I think the New King James came out in the 1970s, but Brother Kevin, I don't recall. I would have to go back and look at it.